This episode is made possible by the realistic online game War Thunder. Check out this game through the link in the description below, and going through that link not only supports this show, but you also get a free premium tank or aircraft and 3 days of premium time as a bonus. And let's get into it. The pilot community, on the whole, is surprisingly close-knit, with fellow pilots seemingly always willing to extend a helping hand to their winged brethren. This is seemingly the case even during war amongst pilots otherwise trying to kill one another. This is well illustrated in the previous video we made about the real Red Baron, and it's also evident in the video today. And that's because we're looking at the time that a German Luftwaffe pilot risked his own life to save the crew of an American B-17 bomber. This particular tale occurred on December 20th, 1943, during a bombing raid by the 379th Bombardment Group, who were tasked with destroying an aircraft factory producing fightercraft in the German town of Bremen. The factory was almost comically well guarded, with many dozens of fighter pilots on standby and around 250 flak guns on the ground that were manned by some of the most elite gunners in the German military. Okay, so this brings us to a certain B-17 bomber known affectionately by its newly minted crew, led by 2nd Lieutenant Charlie Brown as Ye Old Pub. Initially, Ye Old Pub was due to fly on the very edge of the bombing formation, dubbed the Coffin Corner, but then it was told to fly at the apex of the formation at the last moment to replace another bomber that had suffered a malfunction. During the raid, which resulted in the near total destruction of the factory, Ye Old Pub managed to drop its exploding payload, but the front of the bomber was almost sheared clean off by a shot from a flak gun. During that firefight, they also sustained heavy damage to engines number 2 and 4. As Brown struggled to regain control of the severely damaged craft, they were hit again, and a piece of shrapnel pierced his shoulder. While he did manage to keep the plane in the air, the damage to the plane's engines prevented it from remaining with the rest of the bombing party, making it a prime and irresistible target for the dozens of enemy fighters currently buzzing around the now destroyed factory looking for revenge. Naturally, these fighters endlessly strafed the plane, shredding its bodywork and almost completely destroying its electrical and hydraulic systems, as well as knocking out the radios so they couldn't call for help. During the frantic melee, one of the bomber's crew members, Sergeant Alex Yalasanko, had his leg almost completely blown off, with the remnants of his lower leg tenuously held on by some tendon. Most every other crew member also sustained an injury of some kind, and the rear gunner was unfortunately killed. To make matters worse, the bomber's ability to fight back was almost completely neutered when all but 3 of the plane's 11 anti-aircraft guns were rendered inoperable. On top of all of this, because the internal compartment of a B-17 isn't pressurized, the temperature inside the now exceptionally holy plane plummeted well into the deep minuses, freezing some of the medical supplies, including the morphine the crew were trying to inject into Yalasanko. Things, though, they got even worse when the plane's oxygen system was damaged, which resulted in the whole crew passing out. In retrospect, however, this probably actually saved their lives. As a result of the severe damage and no one flying the plane, the bomber went into a spiraling dive, and the enemy fighters abandoned it to pursue other targets. Thankfully for the crew, with a richer oxygen environment at lower altitudes, the injured Brown regained consciousness, later noting, "I came out of the spin just above the ground. My only conscious memory was of dodging trees, but I had nightmares for years and years about dodging buildings and then trees. I think the Germans thought that we had spun in and crashed." After regaining control of the bomber, Brown steered it towards Britain as the least injured crew members helped the wounded. As the plane limped through the air, a German pilot named Franz Stigler noticed it from a nearby airbase. Having just refueled his plane and being only a single bomber kill away from earning a Knight's Cross, which was awarded when a Luftwaffe pilot accumulated a certain number of kill points, a 4-engine plane like the B-17 being worth 3, Stigler was eager to add to his rather impressive tally of victories and took to the air to give chase. However, when Stigler eventually took in the state of Ye Old Pub, he felt a twang of sympathy. He then approached closer and was able to see that all but one of the guns was unmanned. That final gun wasn't about to do him any harm, however, as the person manning it was dead, simply slumped over the weapon. As Stigler took stock of the situation, the words of his former commanding officer, Gustav Rodel, echoed in his mind. "If I ever see or hear of you shooting a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight by rules to keep your humanity." Stigler would later note, "To me, it was just like they were in a parachute. I saw them, and I couldn't shoot them down." Given the severely injured crew, he could see through the massive holes in the fuselage, the extensive damage to their plane, and their inability to gain altitude. Stigler thought they'd never make it back to Britain. Thus, he decided to try and convince them to land. However, he wasn't exactly able to communicate that he didn't mean any harm, and Brown soon ordered the most able members of his crew to train 2 of the working AA guns on the enemy aircraft, but not to fire unless Stigler attacked. In the end, Stigler lined up his cockpit alongside Brown's and tried to get Brown to allow him to escort the plane to a German-controlled airfield where they could land and then spend the rest of the war as POWs, but at least they'd be alive. When Brown made no indication he was willing to land in enemy territory, Stigler came up with an alternate idea. He said, "I figured, well, turn him to Sweden because his airplane was so shot up. I never saw anything flying so shot up." When Brown refused to do anything but doggedly fly the nearly crippled craft over enemy territory on its way back to Britain, Stigler, admiring his bravery, decided to escort the craft home, despite the fact that if he was found out, he'd surely be executed. Funnily enough, Brown, who was bleeding profusely at the time and in a bit of shock, had a different view of what happened here, noting, "When friends tried to get me to surrender, my mind just wouldn't accept that. It wasn't chivalry, it wasn't bravery, it was probably stupidity. My mind just didn't function in a clear manner." Brown would later state that had he been thinking clearly and had understood what Stigler was trying to get him to do, he would have taken the offer to be escorted to neutral Sweden. Instead, the unlikely formation made the longer trip, heading for Britain. Critically, in the process of escorting the bomber, Stigler flew in formation beside it so that the German anti-aircraft guns they eventually flew over at low altitude wouldn't shoot it down. Once the bomber cleared the coastline and was over open water, Stigler pulled alongside it for a final time, pointed in the direction of England, in case Brown's navigation equipment wasn't working properly, saluted, and then flew off. Upon landing, receiving medical aid, and then helping himself to a large glass of brandy to steady his nerves, Brown told his superiors about the German pilot who'd risked his life to escort them to safety. Not wanting to cast the Germans in a favorable light, though, Brown's superiors told him to never repeat the story and then classified the mission. Again, as it'd likely have been executed if it revealed what he had done, Stigler similarly kept his actions that day to himself. Now we jump forward in time quite a bit, because 4 decades later, in 1986, a retired Colonel Brown was giving a speech at a gathering of the Eagles pilot reunion and told the aforementioned tale, which he was now allowed to do as the mission details had been declassified. As a huge percentage of Luftwaffe pilots were killed during World War II and about 40 years had passed, it seemed likely whoever the enemy pilot was probably dead. However, Brown nonetheless tried to track him down. Using the wealth of connections he'd built up during a 2-decade-long career with the Air Force, he was able to have archivists pore through German records for any mention of the incident. Unfortunately, this was all to no avail. Years later, Brown had given up on the search, but the story he told was still being recounted in papers and books, which eventually saw it coming to the attention of Stigler, who read it in an airplane magazine. As it turned out, Stigler had settled in Canada following the war, becoming a successful businessman. Upon reading the story, Stigler wrote Brown a letter with his contact information and a note that read, "I am the one." Brown got the letter, called Stigler to confirm he was indeed the pilot in question, and once Stigler gave him details only the enemy pilot in question could have known, he invited him for a reunion with the 379th, where Stigler was given a hero's welcome by the families of the men that he not only spared, but risked his life to save. Brown and Stigler went on to maintain a close friendship for the rest of their lives, both dying in 2008. Now, war might not be much fun, but do you know what is fun? War games. And we're not talking about the war games that countries' militaries play all around the world intimidating other countries. We're talking about the type of war games you can play on your computer. That's why this video is brought to you by War Thunder. It's a realistic, free-to-play vehicle combat game. Now, it always amazes me when I read the stats on these things. It says there are millions of players online, but then I guess I can see why games are pretty amazing these days. Free to play, I mean, why not? In this game, there are over 1,000 historically accurate vehicles, which today I found out we particularly like, historical accuracy being kind of our thing too. There are tanks, aircraft, ships, incredible vehicles from the 1930s onwards. You want to fly that B-17 we mentioned in the video today? Well, you can totally do that. Although, maybe don't expect any rescue when you blow up your plane. So, this game is available on PC, PS4, and Xbox One, so join us on the battlefield for free using the link below this video. Doing that supports this show, and you also get a free premium tank or aircraft and 3 days of premium time, all as a bonus just for registering. And as always, thank you for watching.